Hello guys, I'm here with chapter 7 of What If Natsu Was a Lightning Dragon Slayer. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy. Gildarts Clive was a man of many titles, of many powers, and of many women. He was legendary amongst the verdant fields and rocky mountains of Fiore, being reputed as the most powerful wizard of the fairy tale guild apart from the master, the ace of fairy tale. At the young age of 34, he was at what he considered the absolute peak of his physical youth. Standing at an imposing 6 feet and 3 inches, sporting a muscular body that would make even seasoned bodybuilders green with envy. And having what he considered the most soul-piercing black eyes of the land, he considered himself the epitome of manhood. He sometimes considered himself unstoppable, completing mission after gruelingly difficult mission and wooing woman after woman with such absolute ease he would make it seem like child's play. In almost every one of those missions, he somehow managed to find himself in bed with a beautiful maiden after a long round of what they called mind-blowing sex. They were usually barmaids, hooked by his roguish charms and suave, dulcifying voice after an extended visit to their bars. Usually they fell after their shift at work, being convinced to having a few drinks by the orange-haired Casanova. He would then entice their night with anecdotes of his adventures throughout the Ishgar Peninsula, braving the many dangers that the job would send him through. It was a simple rinse-and-repeat procedure that had women begging him for more. He was living the high life, or so he thought. Strangely, though, during this mission, he did not find himself relishing in a beautiful young barmaid's company. He couldn't put himself to the task. Something was blocking his desires, or rather, someone, and it was blatantly obvious to him who it was. It was her. Yes, it was a woman going by the name of Milkovich. Having met her a few nights ago, during his latest adventure into Brago, a city in the wintry land of Icevan, a country west of Fiore, his mind found itself invaded by thoughts of her. With a slim, curvaceously gifted body that women all around the world would kill to have, and an immense amount of magic power that would give even him a run for his money. She was the epitome of feminine beauty and power. Getting that short, dark purple hair and those hauntingly beautiful black eyes out of his mind seemed to be an impossible task at the moment. Therefore, he found himself not desiring female company in the bedroom, much to the dismay of the barmaid that worked there, whom he had visited once before. The only other woman to do that to him was his deceased wife, Cornelia. Was it love? No, it wasn't, not by a long shot. Was it a deep attraction? Most likely it was, considering the fact that greatly resembled Cornelia, though it was more in the personality than the looks. Of course, it wasn't a jab at Milkovich's looks. By the gods of Earthland was she beautiful, easily matching his dear Cornelia. However, Ur's beauty was more subtle, seemingly unreachable and cold to the touch, while Cornelia's beauty was an upfront, temperamental inferno almost too hot for him to handle. He was becoming a victim of human nature and its tendency to seek out similarities within one's partner out of habit, and he was well aware of it. That didn't mean he was going to do anything against it, though. Instead, he embraced it. Out of every woman he had ever been with, Cornelia was the only one to truly understand him. Perhaps, given some time, would be the one to fill the gaping hole his wife left behind. Yes, the drunken and promiscuous acts were only mere coping mechanisms employed by Gildarts Clive, hoping to numb the pain in his heart for just a while longer. However, they were never cured. For the moment he returned from his job, he would be assaulted by memories of her smile, her dulcet voice, her radiant personality, and her ravishing sensuality. In a moment of sheer introversion, he was a desperate man, crying out into the night of his deep-seated grief, imploring for the light of a cure. His prayers were finally answered, he hoped, when he met Milkovich. It was just in time, too, for if fate had waited any longer, he would have fallen into the never-ending abyss of solitude, with no way out. Staring aimlessly into the ceiling of his hotel room, he idly wondered if she was doing all right, especially considering the fact that she had recently been told of the death of her only daughter. Altier. He could see the overwhelming pain in her eyes when she recounted the story to him over a small, non-alcoholic drink. How he wished he could have said more than what he did. Of course, he did offer her soothing words, but, now that he thought about it, it didn't seem like nearly enough to do the job. But how could he? He didn't know about the joys of being a father, for he wasn't one. How could he hope to understand the pain she felt? Sure, he lost Cornelia, but that kind of love was more intimate, more carnal. The kind of love a parent had for his child was completely foreign to him. That didn't mean he was unaware of the sheer beauty and power of such a relationship. He saw it in Ur's eyes, the love she held for her Altier, the radiance they emitted at the mere mention of her name, and the overpowering darkness of loss that soon overtook that once the topic of her death came forth. But, without bringing Altier back to life, how could he hope to lessen Ur's pain? It was then that she brightened up, if ever so slightly. The moment she mentioned her two newly adopted apprentices, Gray Fullbuster and Leon Vastia, she smiled. Granted, the smile wasn't as radiant as when she mentioned Altier, but it was there, and that helped revitalize the mood between both mages. According to her, both her apprentices were victims of Delira, a demon from the books of Zareth that was haunting the icy lands of Icevan. Both children had lost their parents to the monumental demon's wrath. Perhaps out of still extant maternal instinct, she adopted them into her home, being the mother that they lost, as well as their master and teacher. She taught them her trademark magic, ice make, a molding magic using the element of ice. Already, still in the first stages of their training, they showed an aptitude for different forms of ice make. Gray showed an aptitude for static ice make, while Leon showed an aptitude for dynamic ice make, the former dealing with inanimate objects, and the latter with animated objects. She spoke so highly of them, and that brought a smile to Gildarts' rugged visage. Thoughts of taking on apprentices of his own to pass on his legacy, the fearsome crash, disassembly magic and nullification magic, passed through his mind, as well. Knocking rang throughout his hotel room, interrupting his silent reverie. He quickly sat up, throwing the covers off him at lightning speed. He then stood, rubbing the sleepiness from his face. Yeah, he called out, wondering who would be knocking this early in the morning. Maintenance, Mr. Clive, called a voice, distinctively female. Oh, yeah, he whispered to himself, before calling out, be there in a bit. The room he stayed in was small, yet comfortable, and rather Spartan in terms of decoration. There was only one bed, situated in the center of the room, a small, wooden desk with a rather comfortable chair tucked under it. There was a sofa opposite the bed and, at the end of the room, the door to the restroom, with a small closet right next to it. Making sure he had all of his personal belongings tucked away in the bag that he always carried during missions and that the room was in presentable condition. He slipped on his black tattered cloak with shoulder plates, and his belt. He then slipped on his loose, dark pants, and his boots. Opening the door, he greeted the maintenance lady, a rather pretty woman a few years younger than him, and went on to the front desk. He greeted the male clerk while dropping off the key to his room. What to do, he wondered silently as he exited the hotel, drawing a large breath. The mission is over, and I have some extra time. He spent the next few minutes thinking, aimlessly wandering the street of the small town he spent the night in. His eyes brightened though, when he realized just where he was. Hey! I'm close to Rosemary village, he exclaimed, getting odd looks from some of the citizens. I should go there. Haven't seen old man Rob in a long time. With that, he sped forward to his new destination, completely unsuspecting of the tragic scene that awaited him. Shock. His mind was completely numb with shock, allowing sparse thoughts to flow through. Horror. How could such a thing happen to such a peaceful village? Disbelief. No, this wasn't Rosemary Village. Something that terrible would not happen to such a nondescript village. Rage. Oh, how he wanted to meet the fuckers who did such a horrendous atrocity to Rosemary Village. He would tear them apart. Barely keeping control of his crash, Gildarts Clive was the epitome of vengeful rage, shaking in his post as he witnessed the burned cinders of what once was the beautiful Rosemary Village. He detected the foul aroma of burnt flesh, and freshly spilt blood. He hoped to all the gods of Earthland that all of the blood belonged to whoever had the audacity to attack them. He rushed forward, desperate to find any survivors of the evident massacre, the ground cracking and cowering before his barely restrained might. His eyes narrowed in ever-increasing rage as he passed the ashes-collapsed houses, managing to see burnt bodies inside the rubble. Dear God, just what the fuck happened here, he thought to himself. He rushed to the village center, cringing in disgust various times at the overbearingly disgusting aroma that permeated the remainders of the village. Traces of an unearthly magical signature assaulted his senses like a million knives, bringing his defensive reflexes into overdrive. Just what kind of demon raised this village to the ground? The more he neared the village's center, the more bodies seemed to lay strewn about, some completely bisected in many different angles. It seemed that not only a demon attacked, but a group of dark mages, as well. It was a scene only befitting the worst of wars. Citizens and attackers alike, all of them lay in a puddle of combined blood, decay beginning to settle in. Faces filled with horror and dread stared back up at the nauseous S-class mage, their mouths open in an eternally silent scream of pain and fear. This was no village. This was a pure, unadulterated war zone. There was no life around the village that he could detect. That sheer gravity of the situation, coupled with the hellish magical residue, served to cloud his senses. The scene at the center of the village was the absolute worst. There was a large crater at the edge, with two bodiless arms lying beside it, as well as chunks apparently originating from a pectoral cavity. It was here that he almost lost control of his crash, the fearsome magic flaring continuously, digging large craters where the blood would pool from its surroundings. Bisected bodies littered the field, puddles of blood staining the ground with red. An elongated crater divided the field into nigh-perfect halves, stretching all the way towards the forest of Mezzo, carving a path of destruction that ended in a crater easily large enough to fit all of Rosemary Village within its perimeter. It was obvious now, no survivors were going to be found by him on this chaotic heap of wood, flesh and blood. Judging by the elongated crater, whatever caused this packed a massive amount of power, perhaps enough to rival even me, he thought, contemplating the destroyed house that he knew belonged to Rob. Damn it. Where are you, Rob? Did you survive? It was then that he saw a sight that amazed him entirely. There, in a mound of earth, untainted by all the blood, ashes and debris, lay 3 children, most obviously alive. Finally managing to bring his flaring magic under control, he made his way towards them. There was 1 boy and 2 girls, with the girls snuggled tightly, their heads resting on the boy's chest. He had prominent, spiky pink hair, looked no older than 9, and wore a torn white shirt and black shorts. The girl to the right of the boy, a redhead, looked just as old as him, wore a dark shirt and shorts. The third girl, the obvious youngest of the 3, had purple hair, wore a dirted white shirt and white shorts. He stepped forward, thanking the gods that there were survivors in this war zone, and not wanting to imagine the horror these children faced. He kneeled before them, placing his right hand gently on the boy's shoulder, shaking him slightly. No response. Hey, kid, please wake up, he spoke softly, shaking a tad bit more fervently. Still no response. Oh God, please don't tell me this kid is dead, he thought in apprehension, placing his hand on the boy's forehead, sighing loudly in relief when he detected heat emanating from it. There was movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned to it, seeing the purple-haired girl squirming, her face scrunching slightly. She opened her eyes, letting him see the hazel orbs that she had. However, it all went to hell when she locked eyes with his. She cried in shock and jumped back, startling the other girl awake, who quickly assumed a defensive position in front of them, her hands summoning orbs of red-orange flames. The hazel-eyed girl quickly gripped the redhead's shirt and hid behind it, her eyes wide and fearful. The boy still remained unresponsive. Gildarts was beginning to dread the possibilities. "Whoa, whoa," he spoke, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender that did absolutely nothing to placate the girls. "Please, don't attack me. I'm a friendly." "How can we be sure you're not lying?" demanded the redhead, pointing her palms at him. He remained still, his hands raised in surrender, when he noticed her chocolate brown eyes. They were filled with a myriad of emotions, but the most prominent ones shocked him. There was a protective ferocity swimming within her eyes, ready to bring forth untold pain to those who would dare attack her or the two behind her. But, most shocking of all, there was deep-seated fear, and immense distrust present. Something obviously horrible happened to the girl, and he dared not inquire what transpired. "If I wanted to attack you, I wouldn't have woken you up," he explained, as calmly as he could. He had no idea how to calm distraught children, and he hoped that his words were going to be enough. "Look, why don't you check on your pink-haired friend? He's not waking up, even after all the racket." That caused something to snap within the redhead, for she quickly whirled on the prone boy, her eyes falling on his steadily moving chest. "Kagura, get behind me," ordered the redhead of the purple-haired child. The now-named Kagura only obeyed, quickly jumping behind her. The older girl then inched closer to the unconscious boy, her fireballs growing steadily. Gildarts tried to move closer, trying to help the untrusting redhead, only to step back when she launched one fireball at him, a warning sign of what was to come. The orange-haired man merely swiped his hand, slicing up the fireball into many smaller pieces that dissipated almost instantly. The redhead stared at him in abject shock, and not a small amount of fear. From the impressively large magical reserves he could detect within her, it was seemingly not her strongest attack. "Please, don't do that. I want to help," stated Gildarts, stepping forward once more. He then opened his cloak, revealing his left pectoral. He then noticed the redhead stiffen in dreading apprehension, until she noticed a mark she was all too familiar with, a winged fairy with a hooked tail. "Fairy tail," she breathed, her eyes wider than before. Gildart's own eyes widened, surprised that she recognized the mark. "I see you recognize my guild's mark," he spoke with a small, soothingly encouraging smile. "Yes, I am a fairy tale wizard. I am Gildarts Clive, S-class mage. I am truly only here to help you get away from this nightmare." He kneeled in front of the pink-haired boy, eyeing his moving chest with great relief. He was alive, and that settled the orange-haired man's dread greatly. He eyed the redhead, noticing her stiff disposition, not to mention the steely, yet fearful glare she was giving him. The purple-haired girl only eyed him apprehensively, the majority of her body still hidden behind the older girl. "Why do you want to help us? How can we be sure you're not just one of them posing as a fairy tale wizard?" she demanded once again, resolutely placing herself between him and the pink-haired boy. Gildarts looked at her contemplatively, wondering how to convince her, before realization hit him. The only way to convince her would be to recite the words only a true fairy tale wizard would know. Do fairies really have tails? Do they even exist? Like them, fairy tale is an eternal mystery, a never-ending adventure, he recited, shocking the redhead to the core. Speechlessly, she looked at him, trying to articulate a single syllable, yet failing miserably. Those exact words were told to her by Grandpa Rob. Those exact words were found only in one place: fairy tale. Those are words only a true fairy tale wizard would know, she finished for Gildarts, earning a nod from him. "Correct. I guess old man Rob taught you well, he mused, this time earning a loud gasp from the girl, as well as a despairing expression. He didn't like that look, and it confirmed something he didn't want to consider. Rob was dead. He sighed in dismay, the grief of loss hitting him. He looked at the redhead, who was now kneeling beside the pink-haired boy, her face covered by her hands, weeping. The little girl, whom he suspected was at most 6 years old, was hugging her comfortingly, releasing tears of her own. All of them had lost everything, their families, their homes, and their innocence. The horrors of the practical war zone they faced must have left them scarred for life, especially the gut-wrenching scene of gore and destruction around them. "Let me get you out of here," he whispered soothingly, kneeling before the pink-haired boy. The redhead stiffened once more, the distrust returning to her eyes, but she didn't summon fireballs, or any other kind of attack. Kagura only eyed him with apprehension, a look that honestly broke his heart. Slowly, with the utmost care in the world, Gildarts lifted the boy, carrying him like a father would carry his infant, his head tucked snugly in his right arm, and the left one nestling on the edge of the body, further securing him against a fall. He looked at the girls and asked, "I know you still don't trust me, and it's okay. But, I assure you, I mean you no harm. I only want to help. I know what it's like to lose one's family at a young age, it's something no child should go through. I lost my parents when I was around your age, but it was Rob who found me and took me to Fairy Tale. I guess it's time for me to return the favor to him by taking his children to the guild," he continued, stepping towards the forest, in the general direction of Magnolia. The two girls hesitantly followed him, their sight finally assaulted with the gruesome scene enacted just the past night, fully visible under the sunlight. Traumatized was an understating the way the two girls looked. Their minds had shut down to protect their wavering sanity from the horrific events. He looked at them with sadness. No child should be exposed to such atrocities. Hell, not even adults should. But the world was a cruel place, cruel, yet beautiful. He quickened his pace, making sure the girls were following him closely. He didn't stop until they were well away from the destroyed village, deep into the forest of Metso. The sad reminder of their past lives invisible to them. So focused he was on the still deadened expressions on the girls' faces that he did not feel the soft squirming in his arms. Gah shouted a high-pitched, yet distinctively male voice, and he felt the weight in his arms suddenly disappear. The pink-haired boy had awoken. "Natsu!" cried both girls in surprise, life instantly returning to both of their eyes. They rushed at the now-named Natsu, hugging him for all that he was worth. He was so disoriented that he fell on his rear the moment they embraced him. They didn't show an ounce of care, going down to the floor with him. "I'm so glad you're okay," sobbed the redhead into his chest, gripping him tighter than the past night. "Me too, Natsu," stated Kagura, just as tearful. Natsu was now hugging them protectively, releasing silent tears of his own. It almost seemed as if they were separated for years, finally reuniting after a long period of no communication. "It's okay, Urza," Kagura soothed Natsu, feeling them calm slightly. "I'm here, I'm glad you're awake, kid. I was beginning to think you were in a coma," spoke Gildarts, giving Natsu a small, relieved smile. Natsu, though, mistook him for an invader due to the black cloak, and took a defensive stance in front of the girls, surrounding his body in royal blue lightning. "Who the hell are you?" Natsu demanded, the lightning aura increasing slightly in size. Gildarts looked at the boy with a raised brow, impressed by the sheer amount of magic power he had for a child. He easily surpassed the now-named Urza. Just what kind of brats had Rob been raising? There was something else, though, that put the ace of Fairy Tale in a tense, combative state of mind. The foul, hellish energy residue he detected in the village was strangely concentrated on the pink-haired boy, almost as if it originated from him. Guardedly, he looked at Urza, his eyes widening slightly at the slightly fearful look she was giving the boy. Kagura's face was hidden in the redhead's shirt, so he was unable to see her expression. Something was terribly wrong. Why would a child bear such corrupted magical energy? Was he the one that destroyed Rosemary Village? No, it couldn't be, for the fear Urza showed wasn't directed towards the boy himself. He could somehow detect that it was directed towards something else that resided within the boy, if that made any sense. But what could it be? Natsu, stop, she called out after shaking her head to rid herself of the instinctual fear of the creature that had settled in the past night. He looked at her, his eyes wide in confused curiosity. Why would Urza stop him? It's okay, Natsu. He's a friendly, she soothed, ambling towards him and embracing him. What do you mean? Natsu asked, the aura of lightning tapering off into non-existence. I'm a mage of fairy tale, Natsu, Gildarts answered for her, parting his cloak to show the emblem. My name is Gildarts Clive, S-class mage. Natsu's eyes widened in shock at the revelation. This guy was from the same guild as Gramps? How can we be sure? Demanded Natsu, pulling himself away from Urza and resummoning his lightning. Damn, this kid packs power. If trained, he will be a monster in a few years, Gildarts thought, impressed even further. He has spoken the words only a true fairy tale mage should know, answered Urza, gripping him tightly once more. His stiffened posture relaxed slightly, the lightning once again fading. This time, though, Kagura came and embraced him as well. He knew Grandpa Rob, as well. Once again, the considerably large lightning aura surrounding Natsu tapered off into non-existence, a look of shock adorning his facial features. Oh, Natsu spoke softly. He scrunched up his face in concentration, trying to remember just what happened the past night. Vague memories flashed through his mind, memories of fire, of destruction, of death. Deadened, bloodied faces of people he cared immensely about made their presence known, sinking the boy deep into the unforgiving pits of despair. The absence of the others only seemed to drive him even deeper. All inhabitants have been taken care of as planned, even the old man. He took no notice of the worried looks he was getting from everyone, and the nigh fearful looks he was getting from Urza. Natsu, she called softly, aching to reach the obviously despairing dragon slayer. She extended her hand towards him, gasping loudly when he suddenly fell to his knees. His pupils dilated in a look only reserved for those that had given up on everything, a broken look that tore their hearts completely into shreds. Natsu, she cried, kneeling next to him, closely followed by Kagura and Gildarts. The orange-haired adult adorned a concerned frown, wondering just what this child faced. Natsu didn't hear them. He couldn't, for the reverie he was stuck in offered no break, no breather, no way out. He shakily lifted up his hands and looked at his palms fearfully, as if they were suddenly so foul and vile that they deserved not to be a part of his body. Flashes coursed through his mind, covering his hands in blood every time they ransacked his mind. Screams of rage, shrieks of pain, and cries of despair thundered within the confines of his nigh-broken psyche. Mighty phantom blows struck his ribs, breaking them steadily the more they made contact with him. Salty tears saturated his sense of smell, the taste of blood permeating his mouth. A sharp dagger descended towards him, preceded by an apology that sounded so distant, so faint, and followed by a cry of heartbreaking despair. Then, it all went black. No memory whatsoever remained of what happened afterwards. No matter how hard he tried, and how deep he dug into his befuddled mind, he couldn't find anything. All he remembered was the brief, yet overwhelming agony when the dagger pierced his body, and his life slowly fading. But, he was still standing there, alive. Just how did he survive, how? He asked softly, catching their attention. How what, Natsu, Urza inquired frantically, dreading the question that came next should her suspicions prove correct, something that she begged the gods of Earthland would negate. How am I still alive? And no, please don't do this, Urza pleaded silently. Gildarts sat there, confusion written all over his face, and not a small amount of curiosity. Just how had 3 children survived that literal war zone, when no adults had? And just what did Natsu mean with that question? He didn't die, right? No, he couldn't have. He was standing there, with them, speaking clearly. He was snapped out his reverie when he saw the redhead sink onto herself, wrapping her arms around her knees, a positively haunted look on her delicate facial features. Please, Urza, pleaded Natsu, a desperate look on his face. I need to know. She shook her head multiple times, unable to describe the monster Natsu became after his death. There were just no words in existence that fit the hellish being. She would not, for the sake of him, place another extremely heavy burden on his vulnerable mind. She continued shaking her head, refusing to comply with Natsu's request. He could only wonder why. What happened that had her so scared? What did he do that had her avoiding all eye contact with him? Allow me. Suddenly, a blinding flash of memories assaulted Natsu, detailing just what happened after he was stabbed. He cried out in arduous pain, grabbed his head with his right hand, and fell backwards. Then, his eyes widened in absolute horror. His body began to shake tremulously, as the things he did became clear. Crystal clear, he could hear the agonizing cries that the man who tried to rape Urza emitted when he literally tore him apart. Crystal clear, he could hear the fearful shouts of everyone as he decimated them all single-handedly. Crystal clear, he could see the man's blood staining his hands, finally bringing sense to the earlier image. He had virtually slaughtered them all, worse than cattle in a slaughterhouse. Only a full-blown monster would do what he did. Blood flew all over the area, bisected bodies littering the floor of the village he once called home. Flashes of red lightning, unearthly shrieks belonging only in the deepest pits of hell itself, all of those memories rushed towards him. Worst of all, though, was the unbridled look of fear he saw in her. That sealed the deal. Tears, full of so many emotions he couldn't even discern, flowed like a river, his body ransacked by sobs. He curled onto himself protectively, effectively sealing himself from the 3 that were watching him with increasing degrees of sorrow. Kagura had begun to cry seconds after he broke down, wanting to comfort him in any way possible. Urza's mind was clouded with far too many emotions to count, preventing her from bringing forth any coherent thought except one. He can't possibly remember, can he? The dread that assaulted her knew no bounds, relentlessly striking her, freezing her on the spot. It was only due to sheer will that she was able to move a few seconds later. Tears beginning to fall, both young girls gently touched his hand, but he suddenly jumped back, almost as if he were burned, shocking them in the process. And Natsu, Urza whispered brokenly, succumbing to her own sobs. A sharp pain stung at her chest, forcing her to bring her hand to it. It wasn't physical, though. Her heart was aching, longing to bring an end to his pain. But, how? Gildarts didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to think. The scene unfolding before him brought up many more questions than answers. It was obvious that the children were traumatized by what happened in Rosemary village. But, that didn't seem to be the thing that had them in this terrible state, especially Natsu and Urza. Something happened to them both that scarred them beyond description. Could it be related to the inhuman magical residue he detected on the pink-haired boy? Could it be related to his death? Am monster, he asked the redhead, a dead look in his eyes as tears continued to flow unhindered. The ache in her heart was at its strongest in the redhead fire mage, as her mind barely had the coherence to process that question. She backed away, her blood as cold as ice, her hands flying over to her mouth, her body shaking worse than ever before. please, tell me this isn't happening. Oh, God, please, she begged, futilely. There was no denying it now. He remembered. And no, she managed to choke through her sobs of absolute, crushing despair, looking at him straight in the eyes. Her composure was lost for a few more seconds, before she spoke again. Why, you're not a monster, and Natsu. But I killed them all, Natsu shouted, prompting a wide-eyed look of shock from Gildarts. I died and came back to life. I scare you. Urza recoiled back in shock, her eyes wide and tearful. She shut them tightly, gripping her head and shaking it negatively, as if that were her only lifeline. Her body was further racked by heartbreaking sobs. What could she say? What could she do? She had witnessed everything, him dying, coming back to life, becoming that monstrosity and killing all of the invaders, everything. There was no denying it. So the kid killed, huh? And he actually died and came back to life, he thought, in muted shock. Dear God, what horrible burdens he has on his shoulders. So used he was to being in the spotlight, that being reduced to a mere spectator in these unfolding events left him wanting to say something to alleviate the children's fears. He wasn't going to let a child destroy himself like that. He wouldn't allow it. Natsu was no monster, of that, he was absolutely positive. In fact, he was far more human than most he met in his life. And he was going to make his point known to the children. You're no monster, Natsu, spoke Gildarts seriously, earning the inquisitive attention of the three distraught children. If you were a monster, you wouldn't have done all you did to protect these girls. From what I can hear, you went as far as to kill for their protection. That is something only few have done, especially a child like you. What? Natsu inquired in a whisper. You did whatever it took to protect them, even died and came back to life, and transformed into whatever you became, to protect them. That alone makes you more human than almost everyone, even me, and trust me, kid, I should know. I don't know what happened last night, and I don't expect you to tell me right now, but whatever did happen, proved that you are just like the rest of us here, human, Gildarts continued. Falling into silence to let the words sink into the pink-haired boy's nigh-shattered mind. That's right, and Natsu, exclaimed Urza suddenly, regaining her composure, standing up and looking at Natsu with passionate, tearful ferocity. You're no monster. Why, you are the son of our Rajo, Lightning Dragon K King. You're a Lightning D Dragon Slayer, my rival, and my best friend. A purple-haired bullet slammed into Natsu's chest, sending him reeling to the ground. It was Kagura, and she was gripping him as if he were her lifeline. Her body was shaking slightly, accompanied by occasional sniffs, a clear sign of what the girl was feeling. A monster is scary and mean, and doesn't have cool magic like you. You're not a monster, Natsu. Please don't think that, she declared softly, yet clearly. You're my second big brother. That snapped him out of his steadily deteriorating thoughts. The power the words had made him see that he was still, after all he unconsciously did, human. They were further aided when Urza tightly embraced him, not showing the fear she held of that. Natsu Dragio was no monster, he was human. Crying in unison, the children sunk further into themselves, Natsu towering slightly over them in a protective fashion. With a small smile on his rugged visage, Gildarts only watched, proud that he played a role in saving this poor child from insanity. He stood up and faced away from them, giving them time to themselves. He silently prayed for the villagers that had fallen in Rosemary village, and wished them a peaceful eternal rest. A few minutes passed in this fashion before silence reigned. Gildarts then turned around, expecting to find them sound asleep, when he was met with Natsu looking straight into his eyes, suspicious yet inquisitive. The two girls had fallen asleep in his arms, gripping his shirt tightly. Mr. Gildarts, began Natsu, uncertainly. Call me Gildarts. That MR stuff makes me feel old, said Gildarts, kneeling once again in front of Natsu, noticing that he had calmed somewhat. You want me to carry one? Gildarts knew, by the way the pink-haired dragon slayer held her, that he wouldn't release Urza. Hell, he wouldn't release the two girls unless they were pried off his dead body. But, seeing the child's logical mind at work, he knew he would not be able to carry them both. Please, carry Kagura, said Natsu, standing up and positioning the sleeping redhead snugly onto his back. Where are we going? We're going to Fairy Tale, the guild where old man Rob worked for most of his life as a wizard, replied Gildarts as he picked up the comparatively tiny Kagura like an infant. He took me there. I think it's time I repay the favor by taking you kids there. Natsu nodded silently, a thoughtful frown etched on his boyish features. First, though, continued Gildarts, we will stop at a hotel in a town not far from here. You kids need your rest, especially after what you just went through. Don't worry, he reassured, noticing Natsu's silent inquiry. I will get 2 rooms, one for you kids, and one for myself. That way, you 3 can sleep together. Sound good, Yeah, the Dragon Slayer replied, nodding slightly. How far till we get there, should be a couple of hours. If you need to rest, just tell me. I have food here, Gildarts said, patting the bag he had strapped to his left shoulder with his momentarily freed right hand. Natsu only nodded, not finding it necessary to respond verbally to the orange-haired adult. Their conversation ended that way, with the group of 4 making their way through the increasingly dense forest to the nearest town. However, throughout that entire trip, only one thought passed through Natsu, a slightly darkened look manifesting in his eyes. I'm weak. I need to get stronger, and I will stop at nothing to achieve it. Deep in the recesses of darkness, in one of the most secluded areas of Natsu Dragio's mind, a being made its presence felt. It was invisible, though, due to the oppressive darkness that ruled the area. It spoke no words, for there was none needed. It had its eyes closed, for there was no need to see. It smiled, revealing a pure white set of teeth with very sharp, deadly fangs. It has begun, the Tower of Heaven. It was the final destination for all who were victims to the raiders' attacks to the small, outlying villages of Fiore. Located on a small island on the southern coast of the Selim Kingdom, the grotesquely misshaped tower extended very high into the sky, to the point of piercing through some of the low-lying clouds. Those captured would spend a nigh interminable amount of days on the tower, working themselves to the absolute limit of their physical threshold. They were kept in line using the most brutal of ways, sometimes even killing the poor soul that was unfortunate to earn their ire, causing a shortage in workforce and forcing the raiders to continue attacking small villages. However, the visible part was not its full size, though. There was a section of it that extended to the underground, deep into the recesses of Earthland. That was where the prisons were located. They were large, semicircular rooms on the edges of the building, only accessible by a descending spiral walkway, overlooking a seemingly infinite abyss at the center. It was through that walkway that a shackled Rob was being dragged, by the slavers that retrieved him from the surviving invaders. He silently prayed to any and all gods willing to listen that his Natsu and Urza escaped from the clutches of those horrible men with their lives. Hell, he wished that for everyone, though he knew that that thought was futile. He had already seen Darius Windstone, son of the trader Milton, Simon Mikazuchi, son of Jenna, and Jugo Koslo, son of Mara. Therefore, wishing for the escape of the children was already a moot point, as macabre as it sounded. Throughout the entire trip, not once did he manage to spot them, so that provided a measure of comfort. Hell, he didn't even see Simon's younger sister, Kagura. So that probably meant that she had managed to evade capture. He heard the telltale metal screech of opening prison doors, and the increased pressure on his back when he was pushed into the cell they guarded. He landed with a dull thud on the floor, though the pain did not register in his mind. His escorts said naught, only looking at him derisively before turning and leaving, audible laughter managing to reach his befuddled mind. Eyeing the cell around him, he noticed that it was all earth, no stone or anything of the sort. There were no beds, further cementing the issue that he was now a slave, a subhuman entity forced to do the bidding of their captors. He sighed softly, allowing the debacle to fully sink into his mind. Unaware of an approaching figure that inhabited the cell, Rob sat there, staring aimlessly into the abyss. "Sir," spoke the figure, garnering Rob's attention. The elder man turned around, his sight landing on a boy about the same age as Urza. He was a tad bit shorter than Natsu, with messy blue hair and an elaborately shaped red tattoo being his most prominent features. He wore white rags that barely served the purpose of clothing him, and was barefoot. The same magic-suppressing shackles Rob had on each of his wrists and ankles were worn by the boy, suppressing any magic he could have. "Are you okay?" asked the child tentatively, reaching the old man. "I am well, child. Thank you," answered Rob, facing the child fully. He then extended his hand, saying, "I am Rob." The blue-haired child looked at the old man's hand for a moment, before taking it firmly with his own. "I'm Jelil Fernandez,"